Why is it that the most sensitive souls, the ones who feel most deeply, are also the ones who attract the coldest, most hollow presences? It almost seems unfair, doesn't it? The very people who can see through the cracks in our world, who notice the tremor in a voice or the silence in a room, are the same ones who seem to draw in those who have nothing alive within them. This paradox has haunted mystics, psychologists, and storytellers for centuries. And if you've ever wondered why your light seems to attract the shadows, you are not alone. In our last series, we walked through the strange and unsettling terrain of what it means to live among the soulless. We explored the archetype of the empty shell, the shadow that moves but does not feel, the human form that mimics life but carries no depth. We touched the whispers of ancient Gnostics who warned of vessels without spirit, and we listened to modern voices who see echoes of this condition in psychology and even in simulations of consciousness. That exploration was never meant to be an ending. It was a doorway. Because if such beings exist, whether literally or symbolically, the deeper question is not about them. The deeper question is about you. 3 truths. They don't want you to know. Emptiness imitates empathy. Your nervous system can be trained into loyalty, and discernment is compassion wearing armor. And so begins a new path, a new journey we are opening together. If the soulless represent the hollow shell, then the empath is the flame inside the lantern. This is not just a shift in topic, it is a shift in focus. The real story has always been about the ones who feel, the ones who carry their inner life like a torch through a world that too often feels mechanical and drained. The real story is about. But why, you may ask, would the soulless be drawn to the empath in the first place? Why does a compassionate heart become a target, again and again, for manipulation, for emptiness, for predatory energy? What is it about empathy that seems to paint a glowing mark on your back? These questions are not trivial. They are the questions that determine how you will navigate your relationships, your sense of purpose, and even your spiritual safety in this lifetime. Across cultures and across ages, voices have spoken to this mystery. Plato gave us the allegory of the cave, where shadows could be mistaken for reality, and warned that those who see the truth may not be welcomed by those who live in illusion. The Gnostics told stories of archons, parasitic forces feeding on human energy. The Egyptians weighed the heart of the soul against the feather of truth, reminding us that not every heart could pass the test. Carl Jung mapped the shadows within us and showed how they appear in human form when we refuse to face them. Edgar Cayce suggested that many souls incarnate into this world not only to grow, but to serve as mirrors for those who are lost. Even Einstein, in his reflections on separateness as an optical delusion, hinted at a deeper unity, one that empaths often sense, but one that soulless people seem unable to touch. This journey will weave together these ancient myths, modern psychology, frontier science, and the lived experience of those who know what it is to feel deeply in a world that often feels shallow. It is a story of contrast, of light and hollow, of flame and void, and it is a story that matters. Because to understand why empaths are targeted is to understand the nature of both light and shadow in this human experience. So let us step forward together. Let us look with open eyes, steady hearts, and a willingness to face what most people ignore. Because what you are about to hear may not only explain your past, it may also prepare you for the path ahead. And with that, we begin with the nature of the empath itself. To understand why empaths are targeted, we must first understand what it truly means to be an empath. Too often, the word is reduced to something small, as if an empath were simply a sensitive person, someone who cries at sad movies or gets overwhelmed in crowds. But in truth, the empath is far more than that. An empath is not simply sensitive. They are a soul wired to feel the world with an intensity most people can scarcely imagine. Their nervous system does not merely register external events, it resonates with them. Their consciousness does not just observe, it absorbs, reflects, and sometimes even suffers what others cannot admit to themselves. Carl Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." For the empath, this privilege comes with a cost. To live authentically, they must remain open, vulnerable, and porous. They cannot put on the thick armor that many wear without losing something essential to their being. And so they walk through the world with their hearts uncovered. This is what allows them to see through masks, to recognize hidden grief in a stranger's eyes, or to sense the truth of a conversation long before it is spoken aloud. Yet this same openness exposes them to wounds others would never notice. It is as if their skin is made of light, luminous, beautiful, but easily burned. Modern neuroscience offers us a clue to this unusual design. Studies of mirror neurons, those specialized cells in the brain that activate both when we act and when we witness someone else acting, reveal why empaths seem to feel what others feel. When an empath watches someone cry, their own mirror neurons light up as if they were crying themselves. When they sense anger, their body reacts with the same stress hormones as if they were under direct attack. It is not imagination, it is biology. Empaths are neurologically tuned to merge with the emotional states of others. This is a gift in compassion, but a burden in survival. The ancients, long before neuroscience, seemed to understand this quality of soul. In Hindu and Buddhist traditions, we hear of bodhisattvas, beings who delay their own liberation in order to return again and again to ease the suffering of others. Such souls are said to incarnate with heightened sensitivity, a kind of spiritual antenna attuned to the pain and beauty of the world. In ancient Egypt, the heart of the soul was weighed against the feather of Ma'at, the principle of truth and balance. A heavy heart burdened by selfishness could not ascend, but a heart too porous, too open, might also falter under the weight of the world's sorrows. The message was clear. The heart must remain light, compassionate, but also resilient. Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet, spoke often of old souls, spirits who had lived through many lifetimes, carrying forward not just wisdom, but sensitivity. According to Cayce, these souls often returned with healing abilities, but also with vulnerabilities. They could feel the unseen currents of energy, sometimes to their own detriment. Their gift was also their test, to use sensitivity for healing rather than collapse, for discernment rather than despair. And if they succeeded, they became what Cayce described as emphasis, channels of light, in an often darkened world. Taken together, these perspectives paint the empath as something more than a personality type. The empath is a living bridge between worlds, between science and spirit, between the conscious and unconscious, between the visible and the invisible currents of human experience. They are the ones who carry in their bodies the ancient reminder that we are not as separate as we think. Where most people see themselves as isolated, the empath feels the hidden threads of connection binding everything together. Yet it is precisely this light, this radiance, that makes the empath stand out. Imagine a lone lantern glowing in a vast and empty field at night. From miles away, the glow is visible, unmistakable. Those who are lost may find hope in that light, drawn toward it with gratitude. But others, those wandering without soul or substance, are drawn for a different reason. They come not to be healed, but to consume, to drain, to extinguish what they cannot create for themselves. This is the paradox of the empath. The very qualities that make them extraordinary also make them vulnerable. Their openness is their gift, but it is also their wound. Their compassion allows them to heal, but it also tempts predators who see kindness as weakness. And their light, which shines like a beacon of hope in the darkness, is also what marks them as a target for those who live without inner fire. To understand the true danger, we must now turn our attention to the other side of this equation. If empaths are beacons of light, then what exactly are the soulless? What defines those who are drawn to the flame but cannot create warmth of their own? To answer that, we step into the shadowed territory of the hollow ones, the archetypes of emptiness that move among us. If the empath is the lantern glowing in the dark, then who are those shadows drawn toward it? To answer this, we must look directly at what we call the soulless. In our earlier explorations, we described them as hollow archetypes, as if they were human in shape but empty in essence, shells that walk, speak, and act, yet lack the fire that makes life luminous. Some compare them to NPCs in a vast simulation, figures who move on cue, repeat familiar lines, and mimic participation, yet never step outside the script. It may sound like allegory, but if you've ever stood across from someone whose eyes reflected nothing back, you know this is not just metaphor. It is a reality that unsettles because it forces us to ask, what does it mean to be alive without being awake? Carl Jung, the great explorer of the psyche, once suggested that when the self, the deep center of being, is absent, what remains is little more than instinct and shadow. Without the soul's spark, the human becomes a creature of reflex, driven by hunger, envy, or fear, but lacking the deeper compass that points toward meaning. He described this condition as shadow without self, an existence where the person may appear fully functional, but is, in essence, a mask animated by little more than survival. To meet such a being is to feel an uncanny chill, as though something vital is missing, even if you cannot explain why. The Gnostics had their own language for this phenomenon. They spoke of empty vessels, forms without true spirit, animated instead by archons, parasitic forces that used such shells as tools to maintain control over humanity. In their mythic imagination, not everyone who appeared human was equally infused with the divine spark. Some were containers for higher light, while others were distractions, decoys, or even traps. And though we may dismiss such myths as superstition, the haunting resonance remains. The language of vessel without spirit echoes what many intuit today when they encounter someone who seems more like a mask than a person. Hidden truth number 1. Emptiness is strategic. It uses mirroring, love bombing, and intermittent reward to counterfeit intimacy and breach your defenses. Plato, centuries before, gave us the allegory of the cave. People chained to the wall mistake shadows for reality, convinced that flickering illusions are the whole of existence. In that story, the soulless are like those who never leave the cave. They are not only deceived, but resistant to light, clinging instead to shadows because light would demand transformation. They move, they speak, they live, but all within the narrow theater of unreality. Modern voices have found their own metaphors for this emptiness. Some suggest that if we truly live in a simulation, then perhaps some figures are little more than background programs, biological robots designed to fill space. Psychology, less mystical, describes conditions where empathy is absent: sociopathy, psychopathy, the narcissistic void. In each case, what is missing is the same: the capacity to feel with another, the bridge that connects one heart to another. Where the empath overflows with feeling, the soulless is dry. Where the empath suffers from too much openness, the soulless suffers from none at all. And yet, this lack creates its own hunger. Because the soulless cannot generate warmth from within, they look outward for it. Like a cold stone seeking heat, they drift toward the nearest fire. They mimic human bonds not to give, but to take. They imitate intimacy not to share, but to feed. Energy becomes their currency, and the empath, so radiant, so open, so willing to give, becomes their most obvious target. It is not random that empaths so often find themselves entangled with soulless figures. It is archetypal, as ancient as the moth drawn to the flame. This is the tragic irony. What makes the empath extraordinary is precisely what makes them visible to those who lack. Imagine again that lantern in the field. Those with warmth may approach it with gratitude, warming themselves in its glow. But those without soul are not warmed. They are consumed by the need to claim the flame as their own. They cannot help but circle it, again and again, drawn by a hunger they cannot name. The soulless, then, are not simply villains or monsters. They are empty archetypes, patterns of absence in a world defined by presence. They remind us of what life looks like when the spark is missing, when shadow moves without self, when the mask is all that remains. To deny their existence is naive. To romanticize it is dangerous. But to understand it is to prepare. And this brings us to the heart of our journey. If empaths are lanterns, and if the soulless are moths to that light, then the deeper question emerges. Why does this meeting seem inevitable? Why is it that again and again, the radiant and the hollow are pulled into the same orbit? The answer lies in the mechanics of energy, psychology, and spirit, a complex web that reveals not just the nature of targeting, but the very reason empaths must learn to carry their light with discernment. And it is here, in this tension between flame and void, that we now turn to the question at the center of it all: why empaths are targeted. So why are empaths targeted? Why does the flame always seem to attract the moth? The answers lie on many levels: energetic, psychological, spiritual, and even biological. To see the full picture, we must weave these threads together, for what looks like coincidence is, in truth, an ancient and repeating pattern. On the most immediate level, the answer is energetic. Empaths radiate life force. They carry within them an emotional and spiritual vitality that others can feel without a word being spoken. Walk into a room and the empath becomes the unspoken center of gravity, not because they demand it, but because their presence quietly shifts the atmosphere. Where there is despair, they bring comfort. Where there is tension, they absorb it. This radiance is not subtle, it is magnetic. And for those who are soulless, who cannot generate such energy from within, this light is irresistible. They come near as if to bask in it, but the truth is harsher. They come to feed. Like plants straining toward the sun, like moths spiraling toward the flame, the soulless are drawn to the empath's radiance because it promises what they cannot create for themselves. But there is also a psychological reason, just as compelling. Empaths are forgiving, endlessly so. They are wired to give people second chances, to believe in hidden goodness, to see possibility even in the most broken shell. Their openness, their willingness to heal and to help, makes them the perfect mark for those who seek to manipulate. Soulless people, lacking true empathy, become experts in imitation. They study the empath's language of care and reflect it back like a mirror, creating bonds that feel genuine but are hollow at the core. And because the empath longs to believe, they often overlook the warning signs until the trap has already closed. Emotional manipulation thrives where trust is abundant. It is not weakness, it is the empath's very strength, their compassion turned against them. On a deeper level, the dynamic is spiritual. Empaths are not merely kind people, they are guardians of the flame. Across traditions, light bearers are always tested. Darkness seeks them out not because of who they are personally, but because of what they carry. Edgar Cayce described Earth as a testing ground where souls incarnate not just to live, but to refine their strength. Encounters with the soulless, then, are not random accidents. They are trials, part of the curriculum of the soul. To meet emptiness and not collapse, to face manipulation and not lose heart, to keep the flame steady when the void closes in, this is the spiritual challenge of the empath. It is the crucible through which their compassion hardens into wisdom. Carl Jung, with his map of the psyche, helps us understand another layer. The soulless often project their emptiness onto the empath. Unable to face their own hollowness, they cast it outward, trying to make the empath carry the burden. The empath, so porous and open, becomes the canvas for this projection. They may feel shame that isn't theirs, grief that doesn't belong to them, confusion that has been implanted by another's void. The soulless drain not only by taking energy, but by exporting their emptiness into others. And unless the empath learns to recognize this projection, they will mistake it for their own inner truth. Even Albert Einstein, in his reflections outside of physics, touched this mystery. He once wrote that a human being is a part of the whole, a kind of optical delusion of consciousness. Empaths, more than most, sense this unity. They feel that separateness is an illusion, that we are all interconnected. And because they believe this, they extend compassion even to those who give nothing back. It is a noble instinct, but one that can be exploited. The soulless use the empath's sense of unity as an entry point, a loophole in the heart, twisting oneness into obligation. Modern neuroscience confirms these patterns. Research into emotional contagion shows how easily one person's state infects another, especially for those with heightened mirror neuron activity. Trauma bonding, a concept studied in psychology, explains how cycles of abuse create powerful, almost addictive attachments, bonds that tie the empath to their abuser even when they know something is wrong. Narcissistic abuse studies reveal why empaths often stay entangled with soulless personalities far longer than logic would allow, because the empath's brain chemistry has been hijacked by alternating cycles of reward and deprivation. The science echoes what the mystics always knew. The empath's gift of openness can, if unguarded, become a prison. Hidden truth number 2. Your biology can be hijacked by reward deprivation cycles. Name the loop, and it loses power. Perhaps the simplest way to picture it is through the old image of the moth and the flame. The flame never seeks the moth, yet the moth cannot help but seek the flame. It circles again and again until the encounter becomes inevitable. The empath is the flame, radiant, alive, steady. The soulless is the moth, restless, hungry, fragile. The tragedy is that the moth's approach endangers the flame, and the flame, in its compassion, cannot help but pity the moth. And so the cycle repeats again and again through relationships, through families, through lifetimes. What this shows us is that targeting is not random. It is not just bad luck or coincidence. It is patterned, archetypal, almost inevitable. The empath shines, and the soulless notices. The empath forgives, and the soulless exploits. The empath guards the flame, and the darkness comes to test its strength. This is the rhythm of their meeting, the old dance between fullness and void. To deny it is to walk blind. To see it clearly is to take the first step toward protection and wisdom. And so the question before us now is not only why empaths are targeted, but what they can learn from it. If the soulless appear again and again in their lives, perhaps it is not merely an attack, but also an initiation. Perhaps the real secret lies not in avoiding the encounter, but in understanding the hidden lesson it carries. And to that deeper truth, we now turn. If being an empath means carrying the flame, then being targeted by the soulless is not only a danger, it is also a lesson. The story is not only about attack and survival, it is about growth. It is about how light matures when it is tested by the dark. Ancient wisdom understood this well. Across cultures, the souls who shone the brightest were never promised ease. They were promised trials. In Egypt, the initiate who entered the temple of Ma'at was tested with illusions, temptations, and visions that could shatter the unprepared. In the mystery schools of Greece, candidates for initiation descended into darkness before emerging into the light. And in countless traditions, the same message is whispered. The soul that carries great light must endure great tests. The trial is not punishment. It is initiation. Carl Jung, in his deep exploration of the psyche, described individuation, the process of becoming whole, as impossible without a confrontation with the shadow. We cannot claim the fullness of who we are until we have faced what terrifies us, both within and outside ourselves. For the empath, encounters with the soulless are a form of this confrontation. They are forced to meet not only the emptiness of the other, but the fear of emptiness within. To face manipulation and not lose trust, to face coldness and not lose warmth. This is shadow work in its most lived form. Without it, compassion would remain soft and naive. Through it, compassion becomes fierce and discerning. Edgar Cayce spoke of karmic teachers who come into our lives disguised in difficult forms. He often said that those we resent most may in fact be the very ones who agreed to challenge us before birth. For empaths, the soulless may be such teachers. They do not teach with kindness, they teach with absence. They mirror what it feels like to face a hollow so vast it could swallow hope itself. And yet, in meeting them, the empath learns resilience, learns clarity, learns how to guard their flame without extinguishing it. Casey's vision reframes the pain, not as meaningless suffering, but as part of a longer journey of soul development. Modern science, though using different language, points to the same potential. Neuroscience tells us that the brain is not fixed but plastic. Trauma can wound, yes, but resilience can rewire. Empaths, who feel the deepest cuts, are also the ones most capable of transformation. Studies of post-traumatic growth reveal that sensitivity, once fortified, becomes an extraordinary strength. The nervous system that once collapsed under overload can, with time and practice, become an instrument of profound intuition and wisdom. The same openness that once left the empath exposed can evolve into discernment, a radar that detects manipulation instantly, a shield born not of fear but of clarity. The practical lessons are clear, even if they are hard-earned. First, recognize the pattern. When you see the cycle, light attracting void, you are no longer confused by it. You stop blaming yourself, and you stop asking why. Instead, you understand that this is the law of energy. Brightness is seen, and being seen brings both seekers and predators. Second, guard your energy. Not by shutting down or hardening into stone, but by choosing where and when you give. Compassion without boundaries is self-destruction. Compassion with discernment is power. Third, learn to discern. Not every plea for help is genuine. Not every smile conceals warmth. By listening to your body, your intuition, and the small signs you once ignored, you learn to see the mask for what it is before it has the chance to close in. And here lies the deepest reframe of all. Being targeted is not a curse. It is a calling. It is proof that you carry something worth noticing, worth seeking, worth trying to consume. No one hunts for ashes. Only the flame draws attention. If you are tested, it is because your light is visible in the dark. And if you hold steady, if you learn the lesson without losing yourself, your flame does not merely survive. It grows, brighter, fiercer, steadier. So the hidden lesson for the empath is not how to avoid the soulless forever, but how to meet them and remain whole. How to walk through a world of shadows without letting the shadows in. How to give without being emptied, to feel without being consumed, to love without being deceived. It is a path of refinement where sensitivity becomes strength and openness becomes wisdom. And this, perhaps, is the greatest irony. The soulless, who come as predators, end up serving as initiators. They push the empath toward growth, even as they try to tear them down. They are unwilling teachers, karmic examiners, shadows that force the flame to learn how to endure. And so the empath who emerges from these trials does not simply remain intact. They emerge transformed. This is the hidden lesson, that the very experiences which threaten to extinguish your light were in truth the forge in which your light was made unshakable. And so, as we come to the final part of this journey, we must ask, what does all of this mean for the empath's future? If targeting is inevitable and growth is possible, what is the wisdom we can carry forward? To close this exploration, we now turn to the conclusion, where the pieces converge and the path ahead comes into focus. So here we are at the end of this exploration, and perhaps at the beginning of something larger. We began with a paradox. Why is it that empaths, the very souls who feel most deeply, seem to attract those who feel nothing at all? Along the way, we traced the nature of the empath, luminous yet vulnerable, and the nature of the soulless, hollow yet hungry. We saw how the flame calls to the moth, not by choice, but by nature. And now the answer stands clear. Empaths are targeted because they shine, and the soulless are drawn because they lack. The meeting is not random. It is the inevitable encounter between fullness and void. But to stop there would miss the deeper point. The presence of the soulless in your life is not just about them. It is about you. It is about how you respond, about what you choose to become in the face of their emptiness. The soulless are not only predators, they are mirrors. They reveal your capacity to hold steady when tested, to protect without closing, to love without being consumed. In this sense, their presence is not simply a curse. It is a calling. The echoes of wisdom resound through the ages on this very point. Carl Jung reminded us that individuation, the journey of becoming whole, requires a confrontation with the shadow. Without this, we remain half-formed, our light fragile and naive. The soulless force us into this confrontation, whether we wish it or not. Edgar Cayce, through his visions of the soul, spoke of reincarnational responsibility, of souls who return to face trials that will refine their strength. If you are an empath, then perhaps you are one of these souls, meeting the soulless not by accident but by design. And Albert Einstein, though a physicist, spoke with the clarity of a mystic when he warned that separateness is an optical delusion. Empaths know this truth in their bones. They sense the unity beneath the illusion. And though this very perception is exploited by the soulless, it is also what anchors them to something greater than manipulation. So what can you take from this? The practical wisdom is simple, though never easy. Protect your boundaries. Remember that compassion without limits becomes self-destruction. Learn to give without emptying yourself. Trust your intuition. That quiet signal in your body, that subtle tightening in your chest, that whisper of unease, it is not paranoia. It is perception. Listen to it before the mask convinces you otherwise. And above all, carry your flame steady. Do not let the presence of the hollow convince you that your fullness is a flaw. Do not let the moths circling your fire trick you into believing you should dim your light. For the path of the empath is not to extinguish the darkness. It is not to fight endlessly with shadows, nor to prove to the soulless that they are hollow. Your path is to keep your flame alive, no matter what gathers around it. That they hope you never learn. Boundaries aren't walls against love. They are the doorway that keeps your temple sacred. To tend it, protect it, and let it grow brighter until it becomes more than survival, until it becomes illumination. For one lantern, held steady, has the power to light another and then another, until what was once a lonely glow in the dark becomes a constellation across the night. So when you find yourself asking why you are targeted, remember this. You are targeted because you are visible. You are visible because you are luminous. And you are luminous because you carry something the world needs now more than ever. The flame was never given to you just for yourself. It was given so that by holding it steady, you might light the way for others still lost in the dark.